In the grand nesting halls of the Draven Spire, weakness was not simply disliked. It was displayed, pointed at, laughed at, and then forgotten. The dragon hatchlings lined up in shifting clusters along the basalt platforms, each brood sorted by strength, scale brightness, and elemental resonance. The strongest were already being taken away, chosen by elite clans, lifted gently by armored handlers, praised as the future of their lineage. And the weakest were left behind. At the far edge of the hall sat a small group of 5 hatchlings no one wanted to touch twice. One had dull ash-gray scales that refused to reflect the torchlight. Another's wings were uneven, one smaller than the other. One barely opened its eyes fully, as if the world itself was too sharp to look at directly. Another trembled constantly, even when no one was near. And the last simply sat still, as if waiting for something that never came. They were called the failed clutch by the attendants. Not even worth formal rejection. Just left. Passing instructor stopped near them, arms crossed. "Still here?" he muttered. "I thought they would have been relocated by now." One of the attendants shrugged. "No one requested them." A soft laugh followed. "Of course not." The words weren't cruel in tone. That was the worst part. They were casual, like facts of nature. The smallest hatchling lowered its head slightly, not understanding everything, but understanding enough that they were unwanted. Again, the group was nudged slightly toward the back of the hall, away from the main selection stage, where no important eyes would fall on them, where they wouldn't interrupt anything meaningful. The weak belonged in the shadows. That was the rule. Hours passed. The strong were chosen. The worthy were celebrated. The weak remained, until the hall began to empty. One by one, the attendants left. The laughter faded. The noise died down, and the 5 hatchlings were left sitting alone on the cold stone platform. No one told them what would happen next, because no one cared what happened next. The tallest of the 5, barely taller than the others despite being older, shifted slightly. "Are we going to the lower dens?" it asked quietly. No one answered, because there was no official answer. Only abandonment dressed in procedure. A heavy door at the far end of the hall creaked open. The hatchlings flinched instinctively. Footsteps echoed. But they were different from the attendants. Slower, heavier. A human entered the Draven Spire. He was not dressed like a noble handler, not armored like a dragon keeper, just worn boots, a work jacket, and eyes that looked tired in a way the hatchlings didn't understand yet. He stopped the moment he saw them. The hall behind him was empty, the echoes of greatness still lingering in the air. And there they were, 5 forgotten hatchlings at the edge of everything. The human frowned slightly. "Those the rejects?" he asked. An attendant nearby nodded. "Yes, unassigned. Unwanted." Another added casually. The human stared at them for a long moment. The hatchlings tensed, waiting for laughter, or dismissal, or worse, indifference. Instead, he walked closer, slowly, not like an authority figure, not like a judge, just like someone approaching something fragile. He crouched down in front of them. The hatchlings stiffened, every instinct screaming to prepare for rejection. But the human didn't speak immediately. He just looked at them, really looked. Then he sighed. "You're all skin and bone," he muttered. A pause. "Don't they feed you properly in this place?" No one answered. The attendants behind him exchanged glances. The human reached into his pocket. The hatchlings flinched as he moved, but he only pulled out a simple ration bar. He broke it in half, then in smaller pieces, and placed it on the stone between them. "Here," he said simply. No command, no expectation, just offering. The smallest hatchling hesitated, then moved forward, slowly, carefully, as if expecting punishment halfway through. Took a bite, then froze. The others followed quickly after, not because they trusted him yet, but because hunger made courage unnecessary. The human watched quietly as they ate. No amusement, no superiority, just observation. Then he stood up, dusting his hands off. "Yeah," he said. I'm taking them. An attendant blinked. Excuse me? The human didn't even look at him. I said I'm taking them. A pause. They're coming with me. Silence fell across the hall again. Because no one had ever said that before. Not about them. The weakest hatchlings slowly stopped eating, watching him, confused, hopeful, terrified of what hope might mean. The attendant finally spoke. They're defective. The human turned slightly. His expression didn't change much, but his voice did. Then I'll fix what you couldn't. And just like that, something in the world shifted. Because for the first time in their lives, the weakest hatchlings were no longer being evaluated. They were being chosen. No one moved for a moment after his words. The hall stayed frozen in that uncomfortable space between disbelief and irritation. Even the torchlight seemed to flicker a little slower, as if it too was listening. The attendant who had spoken first let out a short laugh. You can't be serious, he said. Those hatchlings failed every standard assessment. They're unstable, underdeveloped. I heard you, the human interrupted calmly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The silence that followed cut sharper than any shout. The human looked back at the 5 hatchlings. They had stopped eating now. All of them, watching him instead. Waiting. Because I'm taking them wasn't something they understood fully. But it sounded different. Not like rejection. Not like mockery. Not like the usual ending. The smallest hatchling tilted its head slightly, crumbs still on its snout. The human crouched again, slower this time. Hey, he said softly. The hatchlings flinched, then steadied. Still afraid. Still listening. I'm not asking you to be perfect, he added. A pause. I'm not asking you to be anything you're not. He glanced at their wings, their scales, their uneven posture. Because clearly nobody here did you any favors. That earned another tense shift from the attendants behind him. One of them stepped forward. Human, she said coldly. You don't understand what you're interfering with. He stood up slightly, finally looking at her. Then explain it, he said. The attendant hesitated for half a second, then gestured at the hatchlings. They are structurally weak. Their mana channels are inconsistent. 2 of them barely register elemental response at all. The human nodded slowly like he was following but not agreeing. And, he asked. The word landed wrong in the hall. The attendant frowned. That means they are not viable for training, bonding contracts, or… Yeah, he cut in again. I got that part. He turned back to the hatchlings. They were all still watching him. Completely still now. Like even breathing too loudly might ruin whatever this moment was. The human exhaled through his nose. You know what I see? He said quietly. No one answered. So he continued anyway. I see 5 kids nobody bothered to help. A pause. I see creatures that got labeled failure before anyone tried to teach them anything. He knelt again closer to their level. The smallest hatchling took a tiny step forward without realizing it. And I see something worth fixing. The attendants stiffened. One of them scoffed. You can't fix nature. The human looked at him briefly. Good thing I'm not asking nature for permission, he replied. That shut them up. Not loudly, but completely. A deeper voice echoed from the side of the hall. An older instructor stepped forward now, arms folded. And what exactly do you intend to do with them? He asked. The human glanced at the hatchlings again. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, feed them, he said simply. Teach them. Make sure they don't get treated like scrap. He shrugged slightly. Start there. A faint, almost mocking chuckle came from one of the attendants. And after that? The human finally smiled, but it wasn't amused. It was steady, certain. After that, he repeated. He looked down at the weakest hatchlings again. They decide what they become. Silence followed, but something in it had changed. The instructor studied him carefully now. You're aware of the responsibility you're taking on? The human nodded once. Yeah. A pause. That's why I'm doing it. The hall didn't respond immediately. Not because they agreed. Not because they understood. But because this wasn't a request anymore, it was a refusal to leave. Finally, the instructor exhaled slowly. They will not be recognized by the registry under your care without formal review, he said. The human shrugged. Fine. Another pause. I didn't come here for paperwork. He turned back to the hatchlings. Come on, he said gently. Just that. No force. No command. Just invitation. The smallest hatchling moved first again. Slow. Careful. Like stepping into something too big to understand. Then the others followed. One by one. They didn't look at the attendants as they passed. Not out of defiance, but because they were no longer relevant. The hall that had judged them so easily just hours before now felt distant. Empty in a different way. As the human led them out, one of the attendants muttered quietly, almost to herself. He'll fail with them. The instructor didn't respond immediately, but his eyes stayed on the group until they disappeared through the doorway. Then he said something no one expected. Maybe. A pause. Or maybe we've just never seen what happens when someone refuses to. Outside, the air was colder, wider, real. The weakest hatchlings hesitated at the threshold. The human noticed. He slowed down, waited. First time out? He asked softly. No response. Just nervous shifting. He glanced back at them. It's all right, he said, then added quieter. You're not staying where you were. And for the first time, they believed that might actually be true. The world outside the Dravern Spire was louder than the hatchlings expected. Wind moved differently beyond the Grand Hall, less controlled, less contained. It carried unfamiliar scents. Stone dust, distant fires, metal, rain that hadn't fallen yet but was coming. The 5 hatchlings hesitated at the steps. They didn't understand why the air felt so open, or why that openness felt dangerous. The human stopped halfway down and turned slightly. He noticed immediately. Yeah, he murmured. That's gonna take a bit. He didn't rush them, didn't pull, just stepped aside and waited. One of the hatchlings, slightly larger than the rest, took a careful step forward. Then another. His claws clicked softly against the stone. Still no one followed. So the smallest one did what it always did. It moved first. Slow, unsteady, but forward. That broke something in the group. The others followed immediately, sticking close as if distance itself might swallow them. The human nodded once. Good, he said. That's all we're doing for now. Just moving. A pause. No tests. No rankings. No comparing. That last word made one of the hatchlings flinch slightly. The human noticed, and his expression tightened for a second. Right, he said more softly. No more of that either. They descended the steps together. At the base of the spire, a transport vehicle waited. It wasn't ornate, not noble, just functional, built for hauling supplies, not lives. The hatchlings stared at it like it might bite them. One of them let out a faint, uncertain sound. The human crouched again. Hey, he said. All 5 froze instantly. I know everything here has been loud, he continued. Big rooms, big voices, big expectations. He gestured loosely at the spire behind them. But this, he tapped the side of the transport. This is just getting you somewhere else. The smallest hatchling tilted its head. Else? It echoed softly. The human blinked slightly, then smiled just a little. Yeah, he said. Else. He opened the side door slowly. The interior was plain. Seats reinforced. Warm enough. Nothing impressive. The hatchlings didn't move immediately, so he tried something different. He stepped in first. Sat down. Waited. No pressure. No command. Just presence. After a long moment, the smallest hatchling climbed in. Then the second. Then, slowly, the rest followed, tight clusters but moving together. They stayed as far from the edges as possible, pressed into one another like the world might tilt at any moment. The human closed the door carefully behind them. The vehicle started with a low hum. The hatchlings flinched, then steadied as it continued without harm. The spire began to shrink in the window. Tall, cold, distant. the place that had measured them and found them lacking. The largest hatchling watched it disappear, then lowered its head. "We're not going back," it said quietly. It wasn't a question. The human glanced over. "No," he said simply. "We're not." A long silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. The road ahead stretched outward, past stone districts, past controlled nesting zones, toward areas the hatchlings had never seen. Places without rankings, without judges, without constant evaluation. The smallest hatchling finally leaned slightly against the seat instead of its siblings. Still alert, but no longer rigid. The human noticed and adjusted the interior lining with a spare cloth, making a small nest-like corner. "Not much," he said, "but it'll do for now." The hatchling hesitated, then settled into it. The others slowly followed suit, loosening their tight cluster just enough to rest without pressing into panic. The human kept one eye on the road, one on them. "You're gonna hear a lot of things out there," he said after a while. No response. "They'll call you weak," he continued. A pause. "They'll call you mistakes." The smallest hatchling stirred slightly. The human's voice didn't change. "But none of that decides what you are." Silence. Then, quietly, the largest hatchling asked, "What does?" The human didn't answer immediately. The road stretched ahead, wide and uncertain. Then he said, "What you become when someone finally gives you a chance to try." That word, try, hung in the air differently than all the others before it. Not judgment, not expectation, just possibility. The hatchlings didn't fully understand it yet, but they felt it. And for the first time since hatching, the idea of the future didn't feel like something already decided. It felt open. The facility came into view just after dusk. It wasn't a palace. It wasn't a spire. Just a wide, low training complex on the edge of a neutral valley. Old stone buildings, open yards, and reinforced shelters built for something that clearly used to be bigger than it was now. The humans slowed the transport as they approached the gate. The hatchlings immediately noticed the change. Tension returned in small waves, subtle at first, then sharper as unfamiliar structures filled the window. The smallest hatchling pressed closer to the seat edge. "This place is not the spire," the largest one said quietly. "No," the human replied. "It's not." The gate guard stepped forward as the vehicle stopped. A woman in practical armor, not ceremonial. Her eyes scanned the transport, then paused as she saw what was inside. "You brought 5?" she asked flatly. The human stepped out. "Yeah," he said. "That's the idea." The guard crossed her arms. "These are the failed spire batch?" The smallest hatchling stiffened instantly at the word failed. The human noticed. So did she. A brief pause followed. "That's what they were called," she corrected, slightly less sharp. "They don't get called that here," the human said simply. The guard studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You really think this is going to work?" The human glanced back into the transport. The hatchlings were watching through the window, still uncertain, but no longer completely frozen. "I don't know yet," he admitted, then added, "but I know what leaving them there looks like." That answer seemed to settle something in her expression. Not approval, just understanding. "Fine," she said. "Bring them in." The gate opened. The transport rolled forward. The hatchlings stepped out one by one. The ground here was different, soft dirt mixed with reinforced stone paths. No towering judgment halls. No echoing voices of ranking instructors. Just open space. Too open at first. They stayed close together instinctively. The human didn't rush them. He simply walked slightly ahead, letting them follow at their own pace. Inside the training yard, other dragon hatchlings were already present. Stronger ones, healthier ones, confident ones. The contrast was immediate. Whispers started almost instantly. "Spire rejects? They look unstable. Why are they here?" The smallest hatchling lowered its head slightly. The old instinct returned fast. The human stopped walking. So did they. He turned halfway. "Hey," he said. The group behind him quieted slightly. He didn't raise his voice, Didn't need to. This place doesn't do that, he said calmly, gesturing loosely around. Do what? One of the stronger hatchlings called out. The human looked at them. Decide who someone is before they've even tried anything. A few of the stronger hatchlings scoffed quietly, but the guard's presence kept it contained. The human crouched again, facing his group. The weakest 5. They're going to look at you, he said softly. And they're going to guess things. The smallest hatchling blinked slowly. Guess? It repeated. Yeah, he said. Wrong guesses, mostly. A pause. But guesses don't matter. He stood again. What matters is what you do next. He pointed toward the open training field. First step, he said. Walk. The hatchlings hesitated. Then the smallest one moved. Just one step forward. The others followed immediately. Not confident, not strong, but together, they crossed into the yard. And for the first time since hatching, no one stopped them. Training began quietly that first day. No harsh drills. No rankings shouted across the field. Just basic movement, feeding schedules, and controlled exercise. The hatchlings struggled immediately. They were slower, weaker, less coordinated. But this time no one laughed. Not openly. Not with permission. The human watched from the side as they tried. Clumsy steps, uneven balance, uncertain responses. At one point, the smallest hatchling stumbled during a basic movement drill. It froze immediately, bracing for correction, for judgment, for the familiar ending. Instead, the human simply said, "Try again." No tone of disappointment, no expectation of perfection, just instruction. The hatchling blinked, then slowly got back up, and tried again. This time it didn't fall. It was still weak, still unsteady, but it completed the step. The human nodded once. Good, he said. That single word landed harder than any praise it had ever heard in the spire. Not because it was grand, but because it was real. As the sun dipped lower over the valley, the 5 hatchlings stayed together at the edge of the field, breathing heavily from effort, but not fear. The strongest hatchlings watched from afar, still unsure, still judging, but no longer laughing. And the human just stood there, arms crossed, watching the weakest group try again. Because for him, this wasn't about fixing perfection. It was about proving something simpler. That weakness wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of one that hadn't been written yet. Days turned into weeks at the Valley Training Complex. And slowly, something changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the small things. The smallest hatchling no longer hesitated before stepping forward. The one with uneven wings began holding balance longer during drills. The trembling one stopped shaking every time a voice rose nearby. And the quietest one started speaking. Short words, soft sounds, but intentional now. The weakest group was still the weakest. That hadn't changed, but how they carried it had. The stronger hatchlings still watched them, at first with confusion, then curiosity, then something harder to name, because the failures didn't leave. They didn't disappear under pressure. They didn't break under comparison. They just kept trying again. One afternoon, during a coordination exercise, the smallest hatchling stumbled again. A few nearby hatchlings snickered quietly. Old habit, old comfort. But the sound stopped almost immediately when the human stepped forward. He didn't look angry, just steady. Again, he said. The smallest hatchling blinked, then carefully stood up, and tried again. No shame, no panic, just effort. This time it succeeded. Not perfectly, but enough. The human nodded. Good. The word didn't change the world, but it changed something in them. Later that evening, as the training yard emptied, one of the stronger hatchlings approached the fence near where the weakest group rested. It hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Why don't you quit?" it asked bluntly. The weakest group looked at it. No anger, no defensiveness, just confusion at the question itself. The largest of the 5 tilted its head slightly. "Quit?" it repeated. The stronger hatchling nodded toward the field. "You're always last. always struggling. They even called you Spire rejects. A pause. So why stay? Silence followed. The smallest hatchling shifted slightly, then spoke slowly. We used to wait, it said. The stronger hatchling frowned. Wait for what? The group of 5 exchanged a brief glance. Then the quietest one answered. For someone to say try again. The words hung there longer than expected. The stronger hatchling didn't respond immediately, because it didn't understand that answer. Not fully, but it didn't sound like weakness. It sounded like something else. Something it had never considered before. The human, standing a short distance away, overheard the exchange. He didn't interrupt. He just watched. And for the first time since arriving, he noticed something subtle in the other groups. The strongest hatchlings weren't just observing anymore. They were recalculating. That night, a message arrived at the facility. Official seal. Spire authority. High clearance. The guard handed it to the human without comment. He read it once, then again. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes sharpened slightly. The guard spoke quietly. They want them back? The human folded the message. No, he said. A pause. Worse. The guard frowned. Worse how? He looked toward the training yard, where the 5 weakest hatchlings were resting together under a shelter, unaware. They want to evaluate the bond. The guard's face tightened. Meaning? The human exhaled slowly. Meaning they've noticed something they can't control anymore. A silence followed. The wind moved through the valley, brushing against the training structures. Somewhere in the yard, a small hatchling let out a soft, sleepy sound. The human turned the message over in his hand. They're coming, he said quietly. Not as a warning, as fact. The guard looked at him. What do we do? The human didn't answer right away. Then he said something simple. Keep training. A pause. And don't let them decide what these kids are before they even walk through the gate. The guard nodded slowly. But tension settled into the facility anyway, because everyone understood what was coming next. The Spire didn't send messages like that without intent. And when they arrived, they wouldn't be looking for improvement. They would be looking for ownership. That night, the human stood outside the shelter where the weakest hatchlings slept. He didn't go in. He just watched them for a while. 5 small lives that had once been discarded without thought. Now breathing steadily, growing, trying. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. They're not yours anymore, he murmured. A pause. And they're not going back. Inside the shelter, one of the hatchlings shifted slightly in its sleep, as if hearing something it didn't fully understand. And outside, the human stayed awake a little longer than usual, because the story that began with mockery was about to be tested by the people who created it. The Spire delegation arrived at dawn. 3 ships, silent descent, controlled landing, no celebration, no announcement, just authority touching ground. The entire valley training complex felt it immediately. Even the wind seemed to shift. The humans stood at the center of the yard when they stepped out. So did the guard. So did every hatchling, including the weakest 5. They didn't understand everything yet, but they understood enough to recognize the tone of the moment. Something important had come. Something that did not expect to be refused. The lead Spire official stepped forward first. Clad in ceremonial observation armor, expression calm but sharp. Behind them, 2 analysts and a containment specialist. Their eyes moved immediately across the facility. Training grounds, shelter zones, growth records. Then, they saw them, the 5 weakest hatchlings, standing together, not hidden, not scattered, together. A pause. The lead official raised a hand slightly. So they survived, they said. No surprise in the voice, only calculation. The smallest hatchling flinched at the tone alone. The human noticed instantly. He stepped forward half a pace. The official's gaze shifted to him. You are the caretaker, they said. The human nodded. I am. The official studied him for a moment, then gestured toward the hatchlings. We are here to assess bond stability and ownership validity, they said. The word ownership made the air tighten immediately. The guard's hand moved slightly toward her weapon. The human didn't. He just spoke. They're not property. The official didn't react emotionally, just slightly tilted their head. That determination is not yours to make, they replied. A pause. Then, show us the bond. Silence fell over the yard. The hatchlings looked between each other. Uncertain, the human exhaled slowly. You don't get to test them like equipment, he said. The official finally showed the faintest sign of irritation. We are not here for your opinion, they said. We are here for classification. The smallest hatchling took a small step forward. Then another. Not because it understood politics, but because it understood something simpler. The human was still standing there, so it followed him. The others did too. 5 weak hatchlings stepping into a line beside him. Not behind. Beside. The official's eyes narrowed slightly. Interesting, they murmured. The analyst whispered something to them, scanning data. Resonance markers have increased beyond expected threshold, they said quietly. The official raised a hand. Demonstrate the bond, they ordered. The human didn't move. How? He asked. The official gestured toward the field. Command response. The guard immediately spoke. That's not how they're trained, she said sharply. The official ignored her. Prove control, they repeated. The human's expression hardened. Control? He echoed. He looked down at the hatchlings. All 5 were watching him now, waiting, not for commands, for meaning. He knelt slightly, not because he was ordered to, but so they could see him clearly. Hey, he said softly. The smallest hatchling tilted its head. He continued, I'm not going to command you. A pause. I'm not going to make you perform for them. The official's eyes narrowed further. That is non-compliance, they said. The human didn't look at them. I don't care. Silence cracked across the yard. The hatchlings didn't move, confused, but not afraid, because nothing about his tone suggested abandonment. Only protection. The human stood again, then looked directly at the official. You want to see the bond? He said. The official nodded once. Yes. The human gestured slightly toward the hatchlings. Then watch what happens when I stop controlling them. A pause. Then he stepped back. Just one step. The space between them opened. The hatchlings froze. For half a second, uncertainty returned. Then the smallest one moved. Not forward, not away, toward the center, and let out a soft sound. Not a command response, not a trained behavior, a signal. The others reacted instantly. All 5 shifted together, not mirroring him, not awaiting instruction, but aligning with each other. The air around them changed. Not violently, not explosively, but deeply. A subtle pressure shift that rippled outward across the yard. The official's expression finally changed. Just slightly. That is not standard bonding, they said quietly. The analyst stepped back half a pace. The resonance is mutual, they whispered. Not hierarchical. The guard smiled faintly under her breath. The human spoke calmly. That's because it was never ownership, he said. It was trust. The smallest hatchling turned its head slightly toward him, then back to the others. And the bond responded not as a command system, but as a shared presence. The official took a slow step forward. This complicates jurisdiction, they admitted. The human didn't move. Good, he said simply. A long silence followed. Then the official lowered their hand. We will return for full evaluation, they said, but their tone had changed. Less certainty, more caution. As they turned to leave, the smallest hatchling didn't break formation. Neither did the others. But they watched the human, waiting for his reaction. He gave a small nod. Still here, he said quietly. That was enough. As the Spire delegation departed, the wind returned to the valley slowly. The pressure faded. But the consequence remained. Because now the Spire had seen them, not as failures, not as rejects, but as something they could not easily define anymore. And anything the Spire could not define, they eventually tried to control. The human looked down at the 5 hatchlings beside him. Yeah, he muttered. This just got a lot bigger. The smallest hatchling leaned slightly against his leg. Not fear, not confusion, just certainty in the only thing it understood fully. He was still there, and for now, that meant everything.